Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a fascinating journey, balancing on the absolute bleeding edge of established science and peering deep into the realm of the unexplained. We're going to unpack a highly intriguing conversation between Joe Rogan and Dr. Dean Radin. It's a discussion that walks a tightrope, really, right? On the borderland between what we definitively know about the brain and what some speculate might be the hidden, untapped potential of the human mind.
So, can the human mind actually perceive the future? If you pose that to most mainstream scientists, you're going to get a swift no way. But ask Dr. Dean Radin, and well, the answer gets a whole lot more complicated. What's truly intriguing here is Radin's background. See, he's not your typical mystic. The guy was actually trained as an engineer and a psychologist, doing stints at places like Princeton University and Bell Labs, before he morphed into what you might call an anomaly hunter. Today, he serves as the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is an organization literally dedicated to studying the exact phenomena that conventional science often leaves behind.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the frontiers of science, then dive into the highly classified Stargate Program. After that, we'll look at the framework for weighing claims, swing the pendulum firmly back to mainstream neuroscience, and finally, tackle the ultimate mystery, the hard problem of consciousness. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Frontiers of Science and Dean Radin's Journey. How exactly does someone with a conventional engineering background move into investigating the paranormal?
Well, a central pillar to Radin's speculative research is this concept called non-local consciousness. Now, in quantum physics, non-locality refers to how certain particles can be deeply, intimately connected across massive distances without any classical physical mechanism. It's spooky stuff. Radin and his team speculate that human consciousness might actually possess similar quantum-like properties, meaning the mind could theoretically operate outside the physical brain itself. But hey, we have to be incredibly precise here. Mainstream physicists and neuroscientists strongly, and I mean strongly, caution against borrowing quantum terminology to explain the brain without solid, reproducible evidence. Because right now, the overwhelming evidence we have shows that mental states are strictly tied to physical brain processes.
Take that classic scenario, knowing exactly who's calling before you even look at your phone. Before we jump to credit psychic powers, psychology actually provides perfectly natural explanations for this. First off, humans are remarkably good at unconscious pattern recognition. Your brain is literally always processing subtle cues way beneath your conscious awareness. Second, there's good old confirmation bias. You remember that one time you thought of your friend and they instantly called, right? But you completely forget the hundreds of times you thought of them and your phone stayed dead silent. And third, sheer statistical probability dictates that with billions of people having daily experiences, highly unlikely coincidences are simply bound to happen on a regular basis. It's just a numbers game.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Stargate Program and its Cold War research. This represents one of the most unexpected chapters of military history.
So, picture this. During the Cold War, the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency actually poured funding into psychic research. Yeah, you heard that right. Primarily, they did this out of pure fear that their adversaries were doing the exact same thing. The main focus of all this was something called remote viewing. They'd lock participants in rooms under completely blind conditions and ask them to describe hidden objects. We're talking stuff like a Soviet submarine tucked away in a secret dry dock, or precise geographical coordinates on the other side of the globe, entirely without using any of their ordinary physical senses.
Naturally, the results of this whole program are hotly debated. Supporters claim the statistical results significantly exceeded random chance, like something was actually happening. But critics, on the other hand, argue that the experiment suffered from really serious methodological weaknesses, inconsistent replication, and that any positive findings were just exaggerated through confirmation bias. When the CIA finally commissioned an official evaluation in the 1990s, the findings were pretty mixed. One evaluator saw unusual statistics, but the other saw severe reliability issues. Ultimately, intelligence agencies looked at the whole operation and concluded that remote viewing simply lacked practical operational utility, so the program was quietly shut down. Beyond remote viewing, Dr. Radin is perhaps best known for his research into something called presentiment. Basically, it's the idea that physiological responses occur right before an unpredictable future event. So this isn't about consciously predicting the future like a fortune teller, it's about your body reacting to the future before it even happens. In these experiments, participants are shown random images. Some are completely neutral, some are highly emotional. Proponents of presentiment claim that scientific instruments measure physiological spikes, things like sweating or pupil dilation, literally seconds before the participant actually sees the emotional image.
But again, the broader scientific community provides a really strong counterweight to this. Most scientists dismiss presentiment due to a few glaring issues. For starters, the reported effects are tiny, and that makes them highly vulnerable to publication bias. The tendency for journals to only publish positive, exciting results while burying the boring negative ones. Critics also point to things like inadequate randomization of the images, statistical artifacts, and perhaps the biggest red flag of all, the failure of independent laboratories to reliably reproduce these results.
Which brings us perfectly into Section 3, weighing claims and balancing the evidence. How exactly does science process ideas that are this controversial?
Well, when dealing with anomalies, science really has to navigate this delicate tension between two extremes. On one side, you have extreme skepticism, which just automatically dismisses any unusual claim right out of the gate. And that can be dangerous, right? Because it risks reinforcing dogma. We have to remember that ideas like doctors washing their hands or rocks falling from space, those were once fiercely rejected by the scientific establishment. But then on the flip side is extreme credulity, which accepts intriguing claims way too easily. That invites poor methodology, self-deception, and basically confusing mere possibility with actual hard proof.
So, science advances by balancing that openness with incredible rigor. And honestly, that balance is best captured by the legendary astrophysicist Carl Sagan, who famously said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." The prevailing view in the mainstream scientific community today is that, hey, while research into psychic phenomena is undoubtedly interesting, the evidence presented so far simply hasn't met that extraordinary threshold yet.
Okay, let's swing the pendulum firmly back to established biology in Section 4, Mainstream Neuroscience in Grounded Science. Now, while Dr. Radin definitely explores the fringes, he's also involved with a company called Cognigenetics. They're a neuroengineering company focused heavily on mainstream biomedical science, specifically targeting things like dementia and memory disorders. Their approach relies on RNA interference. Let's break that down. Think of your DNA as a giant cookbook storing genetic recipes. RNA molecules are the messengers carrying those recipes straight to the kitchen. RNA interference acts almost like taking a sticky note and placing it over specific recipes so the body just produces less of certain harmful proteins. This is incredibly grounded, hard science, and researchers are actively exploring if these molecular sticky notes can safely treat devastating neurodegenerative conditions. Another massive focus in neuroengineering right now is the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. Guys, this receptor is an absolute powerhouse. It heavily influences mood, perception, sleep, cognition, appetite, the whole works. Interestingly, it's also the exact receptor that psychedelic substances like psilocybin and LSD bind to. Mainstream science is heavily invested right now in understanding how manipulating this specific pathway could totally revolutionize treatments for PTSD, depression, and cognitive dysfunction. Obviously, it requires rigorous, extensive clinical testing to get right, but man, the therapeutic potential here is just massive.
Let's move on to Section 5, the hard problem and the mystery of mind. This is where the hard science of receptors and the fringe anomalies crash right into the exact same fundamental question.
Because look, despite mapping the brain's receptors and decoding RNA, neuroscience still cannot explain why subjective experience even exists. The philosopher David Chalmers famously calls this the hard problem of consciousness. And right now, there are four main philosophical camps fighting over the answer. First up is physicalism. This is the mainstream view. Basically, meat acts and mind emerges. Then you have dualism, which says mind and physical matter are entirely separate things. Third is idealism. This one completely flips the script, arguing that consciousness is actually the base layer of reality, and matter emerges from it. And finally, panpsychism, which suggests consciousness is a fundamental property of all nature, all the way down to the atomic level. Radin's anomalous research? Well, it leans heavily toward idealism or panpsychism, directly challenging that dominant physicalist view.
But listen, these aren't just lofty questions for academics to debate in ivory towers. They have very urgent, real-world implications for all of us. Radin points out that as artificial intelligence rapidly transforms our civilization, disciplined thinking about consciousness is quite literally more vital than ever. Think about it. We are facing unprecedented information overload, algorithmic manipulation that actively shapes our daily attention, and drastically reduced attention spans across the board. If we don't deeply understand our own minds, we leave ourselves incredibly vulnerable to having our minds steered by the very technologies we create.
And that brings us to our final thought today. The conversation between Joe Rogan and Dr. Dean Radin doesn't necessarily prove the existence of psychic phenomena, for sure, but what it does do is serve as a powerful invitation,